Hello everybody, Anthony is here, and in this video I'll talk about how I created this particular concept and what went into the workflow, just the major points. I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. This is my favorite render where you kind of get pieced in this really abstract piece where you can't really figure out what's going on, but then you go turn on the lights on and you see that, oh, it's some kind of holographic server. And that was the idea, to make this kind of holographic servers can lights up. I also wanted to animate it originally, but just ran out of time on this ideation process, so I decided to just stop at few still renders. The whole idea was just only to use the vector graphics. Here's one of the mockups I had. I didn't use them, though I could have actually used this one as a supplemental design for like back or top. I did use this guy, so this was the final plate. However, these mechanical bits that I also have drawn, thinking that it's going to be an animatable piece, I've put them all in Blender. You can see here, and you can see the outline that goes here. It's really easy to input a .svg file inside Blender, and then just to extrude stuff along, then apply a bevel to all the edges and get a mesh, which is pretty decent. And the idea was that I'll have this rod like in this state without any plate, and then it would like rotate, and then the holographic circuits will just grow from this rod, and I'll have maybe like 50 of them. And the idea was to render it in the Octane. I also figured out the way that how I could use a Boolean operation to animate all of it. So I would have a Boolean box that would just cut through the geometry and slowly unveil the whole piece. So without using any textures, so I really wanted to keep it all geometry only. But just the thing is that when you create a graphics from vector inside Blender, you get a pretty dirty mesh that's not really easy to boolean through. It gets you a bunch of artifacts, so you have to do a remesh operation. I actually have it here. And remesh has to go really high, so it's not activated right now, but remesh is at Oct3 depths at 10. 10 means it's going to be like a million polygon mesh, which is really easy to boolean because everything becomes quads, nice quads. But it's so time consuming just to run the operations, run tests, and I was just running out of patience, wanted to wrap it up. And I decided, okay, I'll just do a test render as it is and see how it looks. And this was a really fast test render. Done inside Keyshot, not Blender, because I'm still not that well versed in Blender graphics. There's a whole bunch of sharpening and blurring going on just to push the look. So it looked kind of cool in terms of it's instantly recognizable as some kind of holodeck type server, and if you stack it more, then it'll be pretty easy to understand what's going on. But I kind of didn't have it wasn't punchy enough. I mean, it wasn't enough interesting for me, so I decided, what about if I just create more of an abstract picture where I duplicate it and clone it and do more of an immersive image with probably less mechanical details. And I decided to go with that. And here you can see the final vector design. I've drawn this bit that was like on top. I have a hard drive line on my left right now, so I was just looking at my hard drive, copying some elements. So there will be like a holder piece on top and just a simple rod here that again I exported. I didn't export it as I decided to do this rod, redo it inside Fusion because I started Fusion and wanted to test it out. So it wasn't wise to export it as .svg because Fusion doesn't really treat SVG files well. So I exported it as .dxf and dropped it inside Fusion. Right, so this is the rod inside Fusion. One thing I didn't do in Fusion, I didn't do a fillet of all the edges, which kind of beat me in the end because I didn't do it because I knew that Keyshot's got a pretty decent rounded edges shaded there. Again, round all the edges that you inputted, and I done it on the vertex drone, which did a good job. However, my scene was so heavy that when I was inside the scene, it was really tough to edit anything, and I didn't like rounded edges shaded to it. It just crashed the whole scene. But to start at the beginning, I brought in a .dxe file from Illustrator. I've divided this rod two different layers, so you can see layer 8, 6, and 7. This is the naming coming from Illustrators, and that's so these intersecting parts do not intersect. And then I just extruded it and made a couple holes and a few bevels here and there. And that was good to go. And I was getting bored with the project, so I decided, okay, I'll just drop it into Maya because I'm still not that fast with Blender. And I knew also that Bly treats the step files pretty well, and I actually not yet sure how Blender treats them. And if you can import a STL file, I think in Blender, but not a step file, and usually by default you can only export step, not STL, from Fusion. And here I'm inside Maya, right? So I imported these bits inside Maya, and when you import a step file, you get an NURBS mesh, not a mesh, but you get the NURBS objects on the input, which is fairly handy because this, if I go and convert it to a mesh, it's going to be like a 1 million triangle mesh. Then I imported this stuff from Blender, so you can see this is just the mesh, so it's triangles with the NURBS surfaces right here. Then I went and named my bits in a specific name, right? So I named them by the materials I wanted to assign to these parts. So if I have lights, I name them as lights. Then I have M1, like metal 1 and metal 2. Then that's about it. And I have then chip group, where I have chip bed, glow square, glow 1. Some of the stuff I actually didn't assign any materials to. I use the same material for a bunch of them. But that helps a lot inside Keyshot when you just search for these materials, especially when a scene is this big, when I've just duplicated everything like 6 times, and I have all that stuff there easy to find. And you can see this icon here shows the NURBS surface while this is a mesh. So after I prepared this scene and duplicated, rotated stuff, also rotated this like perpendicular to the top, and you can see how many layers I have here. It was time to send it to Keyshot. And you can see the Keyshot scene here, and this is real fun when you have a whole bunch of layers here. I don't want to search for anything, but essentially search for like M1, and you find it. I don't want to search for it because it's really slow right now. I really don't want to do anything with this scene. It's really heavy, so you kind of have to prepare it inside your external application like I did in Maya, because after that it's really hard to deal with anything. And it's a lot due to the fact that I'm using, well, a lot of parts here. There are a lot of parts here, a whole bunch of them, and also glass is super heavy, refractive and all that. Really hard to deal with it. Even hard to rotate and navigate it in camera. If you look at it here, this is one of the older renders, not the final render. I think my final render didn't get saved. I crashed something. Like that. You can see I got the black aisles over there and transparent aisles here, essentially because the amount of ray bounces I had set up in my scene. Don't have enough ray bounces over there, so all looking all black, but I have enough here, so it's kind of transparent, but not really. So essentially for rendering I used one of these environments, and just by rotating these guys I would get different reflections that I would try to capture. So the render, which is almost black, you can see it's kind of looking black there because I don't have any reflections. So this particular render just didn't have any reflections. while this guy had, and that's kind of the big difference. So I tried a few maps, rotated the stuff around, looked at it, and did a number of 4K renders, which I just later on dropped to Photoshop. Inside Photoshop I have this particular setup. So all the renders are converted to a smart object, which if I go inside, I have some bits here which I painted. So I decided to paint that cow on top because I didn't like that area. It was kind of messy and didn't hold any structure there. So I decided to put just essentially it's a solid color with noise with another solid color in on top with some motion blue to add to get the same brush metal look. So just paint it. And then all that setup was converted to a smart object, which then I applied the unsharp mask on that. Then I have this another layer, which essentially is my chromatic aberration layer. So if I go into the blending options of this layer, you can see that channels are turned off. I should only have this channel, and yeah. Well, I can turn on channel by channel and see what happens. And I just have a gradient overlay to give some punch. And I have a whole bunch of color lookups, which give certain type of color correction. I'm just using a standard library. I haven't really downloaded any lookups when I transitioned to this computer, so my library is not present. So yeah, just playing around with them is quite a bit of fun. I also have some gradient maps, which again you put them on, and if you're looking for some type of a stylized look, they can give you that look. It's probably way too strong, but having it at like 25. Again, this kind of 80s synthwave stuff. Kind of cool, but I didn't want to go for stylized really. I went for fairly bleached render. And then I have this render, right? Just no reflections, dark, crazy refractions. All the fun. I also wanted to do something like that with a lot of glass. And I have two layers inside. One is glow material applied to all the chips. And just again, playing around with overlays. I would just, like, for example, look at this. It's just overlaying that refraction and invert it on top to add a tiny bit of depth in I think in difference mode, something like that. Actually, let me undo it. I'll see what was it. Yeah, difference mode. Not sure if it adds a little bit of depth, I guess. And that all is again is one smart object that's got unsharp mask applied to it. And well, gradient, I've tried gradient here, but it just doesn't make any sense. So it just doesn't really help because it doesn't kind of makes you to focus around this area, but this area doesn't have anything to focus at, and that's why I just didn't apply it. Just decided to go with one abstract image. And you can see that the fun. I really like this random stuff that happens here. That when you have a whole bunch of lines that's straight and they line on a plane, but then you have a whole bunch of lines that are straight but they're behind, it becomes this really kind of 3D grid, which is cool, which is not really there, because to get that really to get that many layers, maybe like 10 or like 40 glass panels would require a lot of ray bounces, like way too many. It'd be super slow to do that, but having this kind of tricks there allows you to kind of trick your mind and thinking it's a good depth, which I might explore in future. But yeah, guys, that's really it. So I hope you enjoyed this kind of walkthrough. Leave me comments. I'm thinking about doing more of this type of videos, opposite to doing really long time lapses. because they're a bit more condensed, and they should just talk about highlights and particular key points. Though I don't really show how I pushed all the buttons and that. I hope that's still a helpful overview, and see you next time.